Hi everybody, my name is Natalie Hughes, and this is my presentation, of course, on social perception. So we're going to get started here with just, kind of a baseline, what is social perception? Social perception, coursing here on the screen, is basically described as simply trying to understand, human beings. We do see here in some of the text, that one of our theories within our social psychology text by Kassin kind of goes without conscious thought. We immediately create perceptions of others based on numerous factors, which as can, kind of follow according with outward appearance, or even social presence. A second theory in our text suggests that the thought process behind social perception is actually much more conscious and extensive than that. So kind of some contrasting thoughts there. That initial one kind of being, as soon as we see someone, we're, already kind of making our evaluations about them. That other theory, of course, kind of saying, no, there's a little more substance behind that there. So let's kind of dig into some reasons and, topics within this field. So the major topics that we're going to go over today, of course, are going to be self-concept that we're also going to see in our social psychology text here. And then we're also going to dive into, perceiving others and what that looks like and kind of entails there. We're going to use the Kassin text once again, and then also the Valkenburg article to kind of dive into some of those. Next, we have social comparison, which we're going to use with our text here. The theories in social psychology as well, one of those specific chapters there. And then we're going to kind of wrap that up with attribution theories, kind of what those mean, and also, what substance lies behind that. And we're going to pull from social theories in social psychology as well as our other article, Consumers' Responses to Negative Word-of-Mouth Communication. So kind of bringing, everything to a start here with the self-concept. So self-concept is going to refer to the entirety of one's viewpoint on what they are going to bring to the table. Now basically what this means, it's very self-explanatory, but this is, how you think of yourself and, whether it be my looks, my personality, certain things that I do. Some people might relate a lot of this to athletics, say that I'm a great athlete. This is what I'm bringing to the table that, other people can see. So the self is going to tend to be the object of our attention and conscious. Basically, something they teach us in a lot of, my courses I had in my undergrad and even at my job today is people love to talk about themselves. People love to think about themselves, whether it's conscious or not. They're thinking of themselves. That's, really what it says in that text as well. So basically, a really good example of the self-context is, kind of highlighted in the Kassin text as well, where he kind of compares it to, compare it to a spotlight, where it can be focused on one part and then it can totally shift in just a matter of moments to another aspect, if that makes sense. So it's very dynamic and versatile. Now, something that kind of followed that in the text, that self-concept, is the self-schema. The self-schema is a viewpoint of yourself that kind of guides your thought and interactions with and about others. So basically, your self-concept is what you bring to the table, what you think you may bring to the table. And your self-schema is kind of, your self-concept, but really that's going to be what, projects your thoughts and, your social interactions with others. The theory of self-concept is going to express, what intramural signals are hard to define. An individual is going to seek that insight from observing their own behavior. So basically, when you can't find your own self signals is what this is saying, you might actually gain your insight from kind of seeing what you do, really being conscious about your own behavior. All right, and then moving right along to perceiving others. So basically, what was really fascinating to me in this text as well is people assess others very quickly. Initially, they talk about the physical appearance of another is really the subject of the initial evaluation, but personality traits are also picked up very quickly as well. A great example of this that you could kind of think of in your head, kind of imagine that out, is walking up on someone's conversation of people that you don't know. You may notice what they're wearing, what they look like, if they have any specific tattoos, piercings, whatever may set them apart. But you're also gonna, be kind of eavesdropping and hear things in that conversation. Say you walk up on, a certain part there, and that could really be your first impression of whoever that person is. So basically, kind of saying that the way we perceive others can be heavily influenced by situations. One of those things that we also read in the text is behavioral evidence is also kind of refers to what an individual is doing at any given moment, really. So once again, walking up on a situation and say someone decided to jump off the roof. You have no idea who that person is. You really don't know much about them except for, wow, they just jumped off the roof. And you'll make some inferences about that, just as an example. So also, kind of going into the Valkenburg article, I thought that perceiving others in this article really kind of went hand in hand because she studied the self-esteem in teenagers related to social networking sites, which was quite fascinating to me, kind of reading through that. It kind of concludes saying that the adolescent's self-esteem was affected solely by the tone of the feedback that adolescents received on their profiles. So of course, positive feedback is going to enhance their self-esteem. Negative feedback is going to decrease their self-esteem. So I thought that was interesting to tie that in with how we perceive others. And now that social media is such an influence within our, current structure in society, really, is really interesting. Side note, I really thought it was interesting as well with that article that, it was taken, and we'll get to this as my discussion questions as well. It was a study that was done almost 13 years ago, and it was also done in the Netherlands. So kind of be thinking there, what does that look like in that time period versus now, but also in a different setting. All right, and then moving right along as well to social comparison. So really, some of these terms are very self-explanatory, but they're also very in-depth. Social comparison is really simply the way we are going to compare ourselves to others, but it also, is in a social context, which is very, very vast. So we can do this, and it can influence our judgment, decisions, behaviors, and experiences greatly, which Coran and et al. Is going to explain within our text the theories of social psychology once we get into chapter 5 with social comparison and motives and standards and mechanisms. There were 3 major questions kind of addressed with social comparison research, which kind of go as follow. Why do people engage in social comparison? To whom do people compare themselves? And how do social comparisons influence the self? So kind of just took a root out of some of these ideas here. Why do people engage in social comparison? So a lot of what this went over is it's really self-centered, and not in the context of being selfish necessarily, but people want to get to know themselves. So they also want to maintain a stable and accurate view of themselves as well. So they may compare themselves to others as kind of an objective standard for that evaluation. Now, kind of moving on to our second question here, to whom do people compare themselves? So there is, it really does specify this as well. There is an infinite number of potential comparison standards for each social comparison. So it really is, kind of whoever we're speaking about, who are they looking up to as a role model? A great example, kind of going back to athletics, say that someone wanted to compare themselves to a superior athlete, someone who has more skill, more recognition, whatever it may be than them. So that could be either threatening or it could be less threatening and more of a motivation, which I thought was really interesting. And it really gets into that second question there, kind of reiterating that a superior comparison for a person may be threatening, but someone, comparing to someone with less skill set as them, could be less threatening as they would be inferior to them. So it's kind of, centered, what are they going to get out of this? So basically on that last question, feeding into that, how do social comparisons influence the self? And really that's going to be, who the person is, who they're comparing themselves to, why they're doing it. A great example there that they kind of use Michael Jordan as one of those athlete, standards again. And, are people going to compare themselves to him to feel worse? Or are they going to compare their skill sets to someone much better than them to motivate them to kind of excel in whatever they're doing? So social comparison, kind of reiterating the first statement, it can influence our judgment, decisions, behaviors, and experiences greatly depending on what route we take them in. All right, and kind of wrapping up, before we get to our conclusion, but with attribution theories. So attributions and what they mean in the context of social psychology is, it's kind of two different tracks here. We can kind of go that it's explanations of behavior, which kind of are, those answers to the why questions. And then the second part of that would be inferring traits from behavior. So for example, assigning the blame to someone. Someone knocks over a glass. Who are they assigning blame to? Was it because I was clumsy, I didn't see it, or it was a dog? So just an example there. Something that I thought was really interesting in the attribution theories, chapter in our textbook, Theories of Social Psychology, is when they get into that and how people make sense of behavior. One of the models here is called the Folk model, and I'll just kind of briefly run over it with you. It kind of shows you in a visual diagram that everything kind of starts with a belief and a desire. Then it goes down to skill, intention, and awareness, and that all feeds into intentionality, which I thought was really interesting. Another part of the attributions theory that we kind of looked into this week is with consumers' responses to negative word-of-mouth communication, which is an attribution theory perspective, So basically, kind of wrapping that up there, these results suggested that when people received that attribute of negativity in word-of-mouth communication, this is like in a business, that message to the brand and brand evaluations decreased. And they also had that negativity also affected the consumer, the communicator, in how that product, those things are sold, things of that sort. So kind of concluding here, we've discussed a lot with, our materials, our text in this course, but basically what we're looking at here with social psychology, it's the text is putting social perception in its simplest form, is explaining it here, the process by which other people come to understand one another. That's the great thing about it as well, is because it is so important to explore all the angles possible in social perception, as it is a major part, of how we function, how we interact, and how we build relationships with one another. So my questions here for you, just to kind of ponder and then discuss, the next couple days in class. In our course material, Social Psychology, Chapter 3 is going to discuss the social self. How does the way that we view ourselves interfere with the way that God views us? So you'll want to use the text and scripture to really support your answer here as well. That second question that I'm really just going to ponder on here is Valkenburg concludes her research stating that adolescent self-esteem was uniquely affected by the tone of the responses they received on social networking posts. The study was conducted in 2006. I know we kind of hit on this earlier. How has recent research deemed the effects of social networking sites on adolescent self-esteem? Include reference of no longer than 5 years old. All right, guys. Well, this kind of concludes my presentation here. These are my references, our course text, as well as the articles from this week were plentiful in nature, gave me more than enough to kind of put together that presentation for you and kind of discuss, what we were going over this week with perception. All right, and thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys for making it this far with me and kind of listening to my thoughts and how I perceive social perception. Until next time, good luck with the class, guys, and I'll see you later.